The dawn chorus happens in the early hours. If you're up, you'll notice how it builds.
If you've ever gone out and listened to it, you know, it starts slow, and as the sort of light turns up, the sound turns up as well, like an orchestra sort of tuning up.
Starting with just a few voices, then quickly filling the air with others.
Blackbirds and robins are the early singers, and it's believed that's because they have bigger eyes, so they can see more in that dim early light. So then other birds with the smaller eyes come in later, like your wrens and finches, whitethroats, willow warblers. They're all arriving back, many of them from Africa. They've made these amazing journeys to get here, and then they're just singing their hearts out.
The air is cooler and stiller at dawn, so sound carries further, 20 times further compared to later in the day.
So in the clear morning air, birds can be heard. You know, there's not as much traffic noise or other noises to compete with. So that's one of the reasons they sing at dawn. And the other reason is for safety. So if you're singing very loudly, it's not a great idea if you're trying to stay hidden from predators. So using that dim morning light just before the sun's come up allows a small, quite vulnerable bird to stay hidden and sing really loudly and tell all the other birds that they're there, but, you know, without advertising their presence too much to, the neighbourhood sparrowhawk.
And by the time the sun's properly up, you've got a full chorus.
I'm Jenny Shelton. I work for the Wildlife Trusts. We're a federation of 46 charities and one central charity working hard to protect the habitat that birds and other wildlife need to tackle the climate crisis and really make nature part of everybody's lives. And our planet is changing, you know, the countryside and the landscapes around us are changing, and that's having an effect on birds and nature. And it's meaning that birdsong is dimming. You know, our grandparents weren't just being nostalgic, or even our parents, you know, weren't just being nostalgic when they said there was more birdsong in their day. Like, you might have noticed that yourself, that it does seem to have dimmed a little since we can remember in recent decades. The Wildlife Trust are trying to reverse that and bring birdsong back, bring nature back, and everyone wins. You know, it's for everybody's benefit. That's the other thing I think to mention, is that birdsong, although it sounds so beautiful to us, it isn't for us. It's, you know, serious business for birds. They are singing for their survival. You know, they are singing for the right to reproduce. And it would be such a travesty for birdsong to dim and disappear. And there are certain birds that we're focusing on in particular, things like nightingales and turtle doves, for instance. Numbers have just absolutely crashed, I think by about 90% in some cases. Nightingales, of course, one of the big stars of the dawn chorus. There's a reason that people go mad for a nightingale. Like, they honestly sound astonishing. If you ever hear, well, it's unmistakable. I remember going looking for a nightingale once, and I was sort of creeping about in this little scrubby woodland, and I could hear something. I was like, is that the nightingale? Is it just sort of tuning up? But it was a song thrush. And then I heard this burst of sound, so strong, so powerful, and absolute vocal gymnastics. I just like, that's the nightingale. you can't mistake it. It sounds like it's swallowed a Mozart manuscript. It just does something to your soul.
Now things are going to start getting busy in the bird world, because for many species, this is when romance is in the air. From around March through to September, birds across the UK are pairing up, setting up territories, and getting down to the serious business of breeding.
I've just been sat here, it's really still and quiet, and there's a trio of red-breasted mercants just in front of me. And both of the males are starting to do their flirty courtship display.
For many birds, courtship is all about being noticed.
This morning I could hear wren singing, blackbird, song thrush, robin, a few dunnocks in the last week have been singing as well. And so they make quite an easy, small, manageable mouthful to begin with before the great big feast of birdsong arrives throughout April and May. And of course, birdsong means one thing. When it's ramping up at this time of year, it means it's the season of flirtation. It's beginning. Birds are getting ready to flirt, to court, to mate. to lay a clutch of eggs and to raise a brood, which is really exciting. I'm getting stalked by this robin as well, which is good, which is exactly where I said it was going to nest. It's already got a little territory just there on the side of the beach, which is exciting. And I mentioned one particular bird that had started singing earlier, and that is the Dunnock. The Dunnock is a very small, quintessential little brown job bird, quite easy to overlook and to miss if you have them, in a garden or under bird feeders. They scuttle around on the floor quite a lot. They're brown and grey mottled. You could easily mistake them for a house sparrow. Indeed, they are known as hedge sparrows, even though they're not proper sparrows. And they're just funny little birds. And for years, they were overlooked. They were just seen as a really average, normal, standard garden bird. And that was until people started studying the sex life of the Dunnock. And it turns out it's actually quite wild. So Dunnocks, depending on their local situation and depending on the territories that they've got knocking about, you can have situations where you have a typical monogamous pair, so a male and a female couple up, mate, produce a brood, raise it, happily ever after. You also have situations where a single male can have a couple of females, so he can mate with 2 different females or maybe more and raise a couple of different broods. Now obviously that's quite hard work for him because it involves, first of all, a lot of mating. Dunnocks can mate up to 100 times a day. Each time it's only lasting for a fraction of a second or a couple of seconds. So there's a lot of mating to do, and then there's a lot of parenting to do. If you've got 2 nests that you're provisioning, that's a lot of food you've got to gather, there's a lot of beaks that you've got to keep fed. The other thing that happens with Dunnocks is you will get one female who mates with 2 or more males. It can be several. And you can get to the point where a single female Dunnock has got a brood of chicks that has multiple fathers. So she will find different males within her area, perhaps if she's on the edge of several territories. She'll mate with each of those males, perhaps hundreds of times, over the course of a few days as she builds up her clutch. And then those males will each look after that nest as if it's simply his own. He's the father of the entire brood. So she gets lots of extra help. She really benefits from this arrangement. Now, over the evolution of the Dunnock, the males have kind of cottoned onto this. And so they've developed a strategy to try and prevent other males from mating with the female that they've managed to pair with. And that is where the concept of cloacal pecking comes in. Now, cloacal pecking is the pecking of the cloaca. The cloaca is it's an all-purpose orifice on a bird. It's the place where they defecate from. It's the place where if they're a female, they lay eggs from. It's the place where they mate from. So if one female has been mating with a male Dunnock, perhaps those 100 times in a day or whatever, and she meets another male, if he suspects that she's already mated with a male, he can start cloacal pecking, basically pecking at her cloaca. And he'll do this for ages until it's basically swollen and pink. If you've ever seen this, it's really quite obscene to watch. And eventually she'll actually eject her rival's sperm. So she'll cast out the sperm from her previous matings, and instead then she will mate with the new male, and hopefully he will become the father of her offspring. What he doesn't know is that she also mated with that male the day before, and she'll probably do it again the day after. So she still benefits from this arrangement, but it's just really fascinating, gross and weird and wonderful piece of behaviour from the humble Dunnock and its sex life, which I just find absolutely brilliant.
So this is a buzzard feather, and I remember going down to my allotment and there was this buzzard sat in a tree. Flew down into the field, started chasing this deer around a roe deer. I don't think the deer was that scared because buzzards aren't that big compared to a roe deer. But then the buzzard got bored of chasing a roe deer around a field eventually, went back into the tree. And a few minutes later it dropped this feather and I saw it fall on the ground right in front of me. I've never actually seen a bird drop a feather before, and it was really, I was so amazed that it had just dropped its feather right there and then. I'm Benji and we're here in my garden to look at some of the birds that live here. And a lot of the plants attract insects, and particularly quite a few of them attract lots of caterpillars, and blue tits really like that because that's their sort of main food source, and they time when they lay their eggs, so when they're chicks they have enough caterpillars to survive. I've got a kestrel feather here which I remember it's torrential rain, up by this rabbit one, and I spent ages drawing all these pictures of what I thought a kestrel might look like, because I'd seen them but not close enough to actually know the colours just hovering up in the air. So I've got quite a few of my drawings and paintings that I've done of birds. So here I've got one that I did about goshawks, and I got all the stuff to do with like the skeletons and the anatomy of a goshawk, and we sort of made a collage of it. Goshawks, like all birds of prey, have eyelids which protect their eyes in flight, and these eyelids, they can see through them, so they can still see when they're flying. Because they often go in thick forests, it helps because they don't get scratched in the eye by sticks. And this is the nest of a long-tailed tit, and it's got lots of moss and lichen and pigeon feathers that have been bound together with spider webs. That's because when the chicks are in there, as they grow, the spider web will mean the nest can expand with the young. So as they get bigger, the nest just gets bigger as well.
Spring marks a major moment in the bird calendar, as species begin arriving back home from their wintering grounds. Some have travelled thousands of miles, often returning to the exact same place each year.
It's not unusual for our cuckoos to do 10,000 miles round trip. That's probably about average, about 16,000 kilometres that they do. My name's Chris Houston. I'm a senior research ecologist at the British Trust for Ornithology, where I've been working for the best part of 25 years. And I work mostly on the migration and ecology of Afro-Palearctic migratory birds, a lot of which centres around species such as cuckoos, nightingales and swifts that we've been tracking the migrations of in recent years. I think probably the most remarkable in terms of the distance travelled versus the size of the bird might be spotted flycatcher. And so birds from the UK are actually going to spend the winter down in northern Namibia and southern Angola mostly. And they take quite a big detour around West Africa, both in autumn and in spring, to get there, sort of like bypassing as much of the Sahara as they can. It's well over 20,000 kilometres that these birds are actually travelling in a year. And this is a bird which weighs pretty much the same as a £1 coin. Many of our most sort of well-known and iconic species have undergone really substantial, in some cases massive, population declines in recent years. So things like not just cuckoos, but also swifts and nightingales that we've done a lot of work on, and spotted flycatchers that we've been focusing on recently. In some cases, we've lost 90% or more of their populations in the last half century. So trying to understand what the reasons for these population declines, and therefore whether there's anything we can do to help their populations, is a really important driving force behind this work. Obviously it's fascinating to follow their migrations, and it's the sort of thing that, if I wasn't working in the area, I would be on the internet watching just to see what will happen, be able to see individual birds doing what they do. In the case of nightingales, swifts and cuckoos, we've noticed that before they migrate, they seem to home in on different habitats. In some cases, not all birds, but some individuals are homing in on different habitats before they migrate, obviously to prepare for the migrations better than they could if they stayed on their breeding territory. And often these are wetter habitats. We know that in the case of the cuckoos, that birds which are late leaving the UK are more likely to die before they reach tropical Africa than those which are migrating earlier. And that's another piece of information which suggests to us that conditions here might be really important. So what we're looking at is, in the case of the nightingales, we're looking at using GPS tags, what the characteristics are of the breeding territories which lead to these birds moving to these wetter conditions before they migrate. And this will enable us to design habitat interventions or the landscape configuration of necessary habitats and good quality habitat, which will get these birds off to a head start, really. We know that the cuckoo and the swift are two species which haven't been able to advance their arrival back to the UK in line with earlier springs here. Birds which are migrating earlier are more likely to die than those which migrate late. And this is likely to be contributing to the population decline because the birds are basically having to take greater risks in order to get back here. I mean, this year has been quite early. I think we've had our earliest ever cuckoo back in the UK, I think was the 7th of April this year. But unfortunately, that was at Ashok, the cuckoo. People want to look on the website. But unfortunately, the timing of arrival in Suffolk actually coincided with a big drop in temperature. And so Ashok, not surprisingly, quite sensibly, just turned around and went back to France. So it just goes to show the sort of risks that these birds are taking to try and get back here earlier, because the weather can be quite unpredictable and quite variable, particularly early on in the season. And actually, Ashok is one of only 3 out of the 8 cuckoos that we're tracking, which isn't back in the UK now. So being too early, experiencing these really cold and poor conditions when you're already probably pretty stressed yourself as a cuckoo, having just arrived back from Africa in the UK, can be quite a problem, because although Ashok saved his skin by going back to France, he's actually now one of the later cuckoos to arrive rather than being the first, which would have been a big objective for a male cuckoo.
Murmurations can be seen from late autumn into early spring, but February evenings, when flock sizes are at their largest, tend to produce the most consistent displays.
Every afternoon, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon at this time of year, you'll see the starlings. They've often just bathed, and they do everything together. I mean, their behaviour is coordinated before they even hatched out of the eggs. They're already synchronised. But that's to do with the singing in the colony. The singing increases so that all the females lay their eggs at the same time, so they all hatch at the same time, they all fledge at the same time, and then throughout their lives they feed at the same time. They do everything together. But in the afternoons at this time of year, they'll have a wash, and they'll typically perch up on a telegraph wire, and you'll see them all pointing into the wind, preening away, having a blow dry before the murn. I'm Steve Jelliot. I've been an artist most of my life. I trained in Brighton. I started to get obsessed by it in about 2016. That was a difficult time for us as a family. One of our daughters was seriously ill, and I found that watching the starlings was the thing that kept me from going mad. It was just such a reassuring and inspiring sort of experience. People talk about awe, the experience of awe, and it's not just that their velocity is coordinated, their speed and direction, but their actual wing beats are coordinated. By this stage of the season anyway, they have this flat glide pattern to their flight. These are creatures that live their life at 40 miles an hour. And, you look at them and their wings are going together like synchronised swimmers. It's just incredible.
But what's actually happening in those moments? And how do thousands of birds move together without colliding?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of work done to try and figure this one out, because there is no lead starling, there's no conductor, if you think about something like the red arrows, you've got no person giving the commands as to what happens.
To explain more, here's one of our Get Birding experts.
I'm Professor Anne Goodenough. I work at the University of Gloucestershire, where I'm an applied ecologist. I teach the next generation of ecologists and conservationists, and I'm passionate about anything in the natural world, but especially birds. There's actually 2 really simple rules as far as starlings are concerned to avoid bumping into one another. The first is that every individual starling keeps the same distance apart from its neighbouring starlings, and that's the starlings in front and behind, above and below, left and right. And that's not a set distance. It's just that every individual bird is keeping the same distance apart from all of its neighbours at the same time. And what that means is that if one bird goes right, then the next bird will have to go right to keep the same distance, and then the next bird will have to go right to keep the same distance, and so on. So you get effectively a really useful form of self-organisation just from one really simple rule. That works for a lot of the murmuration physics and dynamics, but at some point, if you're watching murmurations, you might see a murmuration split and then come back together. And obviously then at some point, birds have got to make a decision about where they go. And you then get a second rule that comes into play, which is to sort of aim for areas where the density of birds is kind of middling. You don't want to aim for areas that have got very few birds. In other words, you don't want to go outside of the murmuration and just aim for sky. Equally, you don't want to just go for great density of birds, because if you take that to extremes, the murmuration would basically implode. And they are much better at keeping equal distance apart than humans are. An awful lot of traffic jams, for example, start particularly on motorways, where one person gets too close to the person in front and puts their brakes on, and then the next person does the same thing. And then before you know it, the sort of dynamics of people driving along the motorway is fundamentally altered because somebody hasn't obeyed that simple rule of making sure they've got enough space to the person in front. Starlings don't do that. Starlings are much, much better than humans when it comes to obeying that rule of sensible and equal distance. Why does it happen? Several different ideas, and in all honesty, it's probably a little bit of a combination. One is the idea of warmer together. So, as I say, these happen autumn and winter. It's much warmer to roost as part of a large roost of birds rather than a small roost of birds or on your own. So one concept is that it might be the fact that the murmuration is effectively an advertisement for where the roost is going to be. So the murmuration just signpoints the roost. So you get multiple birds performing this aerial display, this ballet of the skies above a roost site, usually starting at or around sunset and going on until it's basically too dark to really see what they're doing any longer. And you get what I call the down the plug hole movement, where one bird goes down and literally all of the others sort of swirl down and go down over that same point, and that becomes the overnight roost. And some of the research that I've been involved in has found that murmurations are bigger and last longer when it's colder. Probably a bigger driver is around predation. So when birds are going down to roost, they are quite vulnerable. Birds of prey will always hunt by getting focus lock on a bird. So they don't just sort of fly in with open talons and, do the best job they can. They very much try and pinpoint, as you would with shooting a missile. You pinpoint the target and you go in after the target. If birds are moving as part of a 3D swirling mass of birds, it's much harder to get focus lock for a bird of prey, and therefore starlings are safer. So you've got sort of two competing ideas, and I think it's probably a combination of the two, either warmer together or safer together.
If you love birdwatching, why not join the flock, our Get Birding Members Club? Enjoy exclusive content, latest birding news, ad-free episodes, and access to community chat rooms to share tips, spots, and more with birders around the world. Go to our website, getbird.ing.